So, there's been a trend going on, and it's a rather interesting one. And ever since Microsoft has announced the Project Spartan and its new browser that it was going to be developing, it's kind of made a giant turn for the way that we perceive Internet Explorer. While there's a lot of hate in Internet Explorer, mostly for its fragmentation between IE 6, 7, 8, and a lot of times IE has been one of the worst competitors in the browser market because it just doesn't support the standards, and Microsoft constantly tried to make their own way of doing things. For instance, through Silverlight, through they use ActiveX, they use a lot of in-house design tools instead of working with a lot of the modern standards, which is why Microsoft was one of the slowest browsers to start actually integrating proper HTML5 and CSS3. And something that's now arisen as there was an op-ed by Nolan Lawson, and it basically said Safari is the new Internet Explorer. And there's been a lot of hate. Now, this website right here is iMore, so clearly they're an Apple supporter. That goes without being said, but it does raise the important question of whether Internet Explorer has passed Safari and whether Safari is actually the new Internet Explorers, and a lot of it is frankly true. While this article puts it mostly as saying that it was just a lot of name calling and poor reasoning, um, it's just that the argument that this author wrote was really poor. Reen Ritchie, who wrote the article, kind of went past the actual point and tried to make it almost into more of a personal fight. The problem with Safari is not that it's made by Apple. It's not that it uses open source technology. It's not that they don't attend special conferences like everybody else does. It's just the fact that they are very slow with integrating proper technologies. Yes, they're probably slightly further on some technologies. I believe they're catching up with version like 6 of JavaScript. Something from Chrome. They it was in this article. Here he goes. At least Safari 9 makes big strides in support of the next version of JavaScript, ES6, and supports 50% of the spec, with Chrome 45 is at 46. Safari 8 is around 17. The fundamental issue with this guy and his point is it doesn't really matter. The web has kind of evolved. And it used to be we were using a lot of things that relied on APIs, Flash, Java applets. The NP API plugin is what was a huge crutch. That's why it took so long for even Google to adapt YouTube to be using an HTML5 player. And now that we have things like that, people are saying that Google is trying to almost control the web and to dictate how it's going to look, and they try to make it seem like Apple and Google they're battling when it's just simply not that case. Google is a web company. They do mostly web services. Apple is a smartphone company. They have no real place in the internet trying to dictate how things are supposed to be. I'm not saying that Google has the right either, but Google is pushing the internet to actually conform with the W3 standards, the World Wide Web Consortium, who is in charge of, setting the standards and writing and drafting HTML5 and what's going to be HTML 5.1. The fundamental issue is they're constantly bickering. Google and Mozilla and Internet Explorer are all making huge strides to conform to modern web standards, and we have Safari, who's the lone wolf here. The article up here tries to contradict that, but the fact of the matter is, we can even look at the HTML5 test. The HTML5 test is a basic test that tests how well your browser supports the modern, basically, how it conforms to modern HTML5 standards, and Chrome is the highest scoring without a doubt. If we compare the browsers, I'm going to ignore Opera, but if you compare them, Chrome is at 526 for Chrome 43, Firefox 467, Internet Explorer is at 402 in its latest version in Edge, and Safari is kind of at the bottom. The idea that people are trying to say that the internet's either developer-centric or user-centric is simply not the case. Developers are always made, it's completely user-centric. Sure, developers may dictate how websites are going to look, but they have to make sure it works for everybody. And that's why everybody hated Internet Explorer. If you look at IE8, it barely has any standards. And then IE9, IE10 is where it got really big. IE11 caught up. And Edge is still in beta, and it's definitely going to get improved as time goes on. But what we see is everybody's pinning and blaming like Internet Explorer for its past. Internet Explorer back when IE8 was created and at the earlier stages of the internet, it was great. Well, I shouldn't say great. It was a browser. It definitely wasn't the worst. Well, it kind of was the worst. It did its job though. It made it where you can get on every website. You had no real issues with day-to-day web surfing, and it did its job. It's a very old technology, so holding Internet Explorer accountable for that in modern days is almost a waste of time. Safari, on the other hand, has made some strides, but it's not really pushing anything. They've just almost let it go. There's really no other official browser too on iOS for you to switch to. So Safari, which has a huge market share, especially in the United States, since we have such a large Apple user base, it's rather sad to see them so behind in modern web standards. And there's a lot of theories about this. The most obvious one being as Google will show off web apps that are almost native. A native web app is something that could basically be run in a browser like a game, and it feels and is fluid as an app. And the reason that's such a big deal is because then you could technically unify all platforms into one, and that's what everybody's trying to do right now. That's why the giant push for HTML5 is here. But Safari, especially if we look at like the more mobile browsers, iOS 405, I mean, they're definitely pushing. They're pushing, but they're not getting to the point where they should be. Internet Explorer is definitely not off the hook, but there are more alternatives. If we look here, Android's default browser, BlackBerry's default browser, and then you look at the same one. Google is always on the top. I don't count Opera because it's based off the Chromium project. They're using the same rendering engine. That's what happened was Opera back in the day used to suck immensely. It was a trash browser. It was using poor rendering engine. It was just all around bad. Then they made a huge, I would say, revelation, branded off of the same Chromium project, and it's definitely much better. But like, we're still seeing Chrome on top, and Opera, basically all the ones, and then you have Firefox, and then down at the bottom you always see iOS and Microsoft scrambling. Microsoft has really tried to pick up steam in recent times, and I've talked about technologies such as WAF 2.0, things that are just going to make the internet better, but then the problem is you always have fragmentation. The great thing about Chrome, Firefox, Opera, any non-in-home browser is it will always be updated, and it will not be cut off if the operating system is not updated, like Internet Explorer. But back to the main point of Safari, is it's really becoming the new Internet Explorer because nobody likes working with it. They say it's the user-centric web, but that's mostly because that was clearly like an Apple fanboy page. And it doesn't matter if you want to put it as the user-centric web because that's just not how things work. It is not a user-centric web. It is developer-centric. The web is for developers, and the users are put forth in the developers' opinions. When they design things and when things are improved, it's for the users. But things like browsers and the tools and APIs that are being created are for developers. That's what makes the internet the internet. And the fact that people are sitting here and arguing, well, no, because that's the user-centric web, which I don't even really understand what that means. They are trying to justify that poor implementation that iOS and the OS X browser has. Internet Explorer is definitely not off the hook. It has caused huge problems, constantly caused problems, and it still causes problems. In fact, if you go to any major website, chances are you'll see a conditional statement. It'll say if IE, and it'll probably give a version, most notably 8 or 7, it will give you a different style sheet. That conditional tag was created just so that there would be backwards compatibility with Internet Explorer. Well, I shouldn't say it was just created for that, but that's the only time it's really used, is for the simple fact that Internet Explorer has caused pain everywhere because it doesn't support things. Safari's in the same boat too, though. It doesn't support a lot of the modern web standards either. If you, we can look at the CSS3 test. If you look at the CSS3 test, your browser gets a 52, and this is Chrome. The CSS3 test kind of just shows us what the browsers actually support, and you know, things like gradients, the properties for images, a lot of things that are not supported, and it's not much better in other browsers. It's really an issue. This test checks whether CSS3 features the browser recognizes, not whether they are implemented correctly. Which simply means the browser can have the features in there, but whether they're shown correctly or implemented correctly is a different story. There's a lot of stuff. And the internet's evolving more toward this manner. I know everybody's kind of annoyed with Chrome and Google because they said no more NP API, but the fact of the matter is we don't need it anymore. The NP API is useless, but it's still being supported. A lot of schools, a lot of businesses are using this technology, and Google gave everybody a warning 2 years ago, and they followed up on it several times. Many articles published over it. Many businesses and people changed it so that would be up with the times. Firefox is going to do the same thing. Microsoft's new browser, the Spartan browser, will do the same thing. It's not something that's just Google trying to dominate. It's Google saying, yo, the internet doesn't need this anymore. It's time to move on. And we have companies and organizations that are simply not doing that. It will be interesting to see how this all goes out. Let me know in the comments below whether you think that Internet Explorer has finally surpassed Safari and that Safari is the new quote-unquote Internet Explorer. It's a rather interesting topic and conversation because even though Safari has such a loyal fan base, it's clearly has its faults. So thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for the next video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put them in the comments below and I'll make sure to check them out. Thank you very much for watching and goodbye.